The Ecliptus Medical Academy floated peacefully above the bright world of Valora Prime, known across the galaxy as a place of learning and healing. Students from many different planets came there to study medicine and compassion, to learn how to save lives rather than take them. The halls of the academy were filled with the calm sound of soft footsteps, the hum of machines, and the voices of teachers guiding their eager students. But one quiet morning, everything changed. Without warning, the sky outside the observation windows turned red. The Dravik swarm, a brutal species of insect-like warriors, launched a sudden attack. Their black warships poured out of the darkness of space, firing blazing plasma bolts that tore through the Academy's shields like paper. The once peaceful station trembled as explosions rocked its outer decks. Alarms screamed through every corridor, lights flickered, and smoke began to fill the air. Panic spread faster than the fire. Students shouted in fear, running in every direction, their training forgotten in the face of destruction. Inside the trauma bay, the chaos was even worse. Dozens of injured cadets had been rushed inside, their alien blood coloring the floor in strange shades of blue and green. The instructors struggled to keep order, shouting commands that no one seemed able to follow. And then through the smoke and the noise, the door slid open with a hiss and a human stepped in. Lieutenant Cass Harper, a combat medic from Earth, stumbled into the room, armor scorched, her face streaked with soot and blood. She was dragging a wounded Velian soldier behind her, refusing to let him die in the hallway. Her breathing was heavy, her expression hard and focused. Without wasting a second, she lifted the alien onto a table. "Where's your trauma team?" she shouted, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. A terrified Zalari student answered shakily that the medical crew had evacuated to a lower deck. Cass cursed under her breath. "Then we're the trauma team now," she said firmly, and pulled a small pack of supplies from her belt. The alien students stared at her in confusion and fear. Their medical training had always been clean and careful, depending on perfect tools and gentle techniques. None of them had ever seen a doctor act the way the human did. Cass tore open the wounded soldier's armor and pressed her bare hands into the wound to stop the bleeding. The alien screamed, and the students stepped back in horror. "What are you doing?" one of them cried. "Saving his life," Cass snapped without looking up. "Now get me something hot metal if you can." The students hesitated, still frozen by shock, until one finally handed her a small plasma cutter. Cass activated it, the blue flame hissing to life, and pressed it against the open wound. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. The alien's scream echoed painfully through the room, and then slowly he went quiet. The bleeding stopped. Cass dropped the cutter and exhaled, her face pale but calm. "He'll live," she said simply. No one spoke. The alien students could only stare at her, unable to understand how she could do such a brutal thing and call it healing. On their worlds, pain was something to be avoided at all costs. They used machines that worked silently, painlessly, perfectly. But the human had just saved a life with nothing but her hands, fire, and willpower. Cass wiped her brow, leaving a streak of blood on her face, and looked at the silent crowd. "If you want to help people," she said quietly, "you can't be afraid to get your hands dirty." Her words hung in the smoky air, heavy and real. The station shook again as another explosion struck, but Cass didn't flinch. She grabbed her rifle, checked the hallway, and called back to them, "Stay with the wounded. I'll be back." Then she disappeared into the smoke-filled corridor, ready to fight her way through the flames to save whoever was still alive. In that moment, every alien in the room understood that human medicine was something far beyond science. It was survival itself. Smoke still hung thick in the air of the medical bay as Lieutenant Cass Harper moved quickly from one injured cadet to another, her hands steady even though her armor was torn and her body ached. The alarm still screamed somewhere above, but she paid them no attention. Around her, the alien students stood frozen, their faces pale with disbelief after what they had just seen. Cass had done things that no healer from their peaceful worlds would ever dream of. Her methods seemed rough, wild, even cruel. But every patient she touched had survived. She worked fast, her movements sharp and confident, her mind focused only on saving lives. When she ran out of medical gel, she tore open a pack of repair glue meant for machinery and sealed a wound with it. When she had no sterilizers left, she poured burning alcohol directly into an open cut, ignoring the screams. When a Runan soldier lost his arm, she didn't hesitate. She grabbed a red-hot pipe from the debris and pressed it against the wound, sealing it with fire. The smell of burned flesh and the sound of pain filled the room. But when it was over, the bleeding had stopped and the alien's heart was still beating. The students could barely believe their eyes. They had been trained to heal with soft hands, to trust machines that did everything painlessly. To them, medicine was calm, clean, and controlled. But the human was showing them something entirely different. A kind of healing that came from fire and blood. A method born from a world where comfort was a luxury and pain was part of survival. One of the alien students, a thin and nervous Crixon, finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Your ways are barbaric," he said, trembling as he watched Cass press a burning blade against another wound. "This is not medicine. This is torture." Cass didn't even look up. "No," she said firmly, her voice low but strong. "This is how you keep someone alive when there's no other choice. This is what you do when the machines are gone and the bleeding won't stop." Her words carried a weight that made everyone fall silent. Before anyone could respond, the deck shuddered beneath their feet. A deep rumble echoed through the station, followed by a metallic screech that made the walls vibrate. The Dravik had breached another section. The lights flickered and went dark, leaving only the red glow of the emergency lamps. Cass's head snapped toward the door. "They're here," she said. Panic spread through the students once again. "We have no weapons," one of them cried. "We can't fight!" Cass grabbed her rifle and loaded a new cell with quick, practiced movements. "You don't need to fight," she said. "You just need to survive. Stay low, keep the wounded safe, and if anyone tries to get through that door, make them regret it." She looked at the group of terrified young aliens and saw in their faces the same fear she'd seen countless times before. "In soldiers too young to die," she sighed softly. "You'll be fine. Just do your job. That's all anyone can ask in war." With that, Cass turned and ran out into the smoke-filled corridor, her boots echoing on the metal floor. The aliens stared after her in stunned silence. None of them had ever met anyone like her, someone who treated pain as a tool, who healed by burning, cutting, and fighting. They whispered to one another in disbelief. "Humans are mad," said one. "They heal with fire," another replied quietly. "Maybe that's why they always survive." Inside the dim med bay, the alien students could still smell the smoke from Cass's work and hear the faint, distant sound of gunfire. The wounded groaned softly, some crying, others whispering her name. The students moved among them, trying their best to follow her example, using torn fabric for bandages and bits of metal to hold broken limbs straight. For the first time in their lives, they understood that medicine was not just about science or technology. It was about courage, quick thinking, and the will to keep someone breathing, no matter the cost. Cass Harper had shown them the raw, terrifying heart of human medicine, and even though they didn't yet realize it, that lesson would change them forever. The smoke in the corridor began to settle, leaving behind the sharp smell of burned metal and alien blood. Cass Harper leaned against the wall for a second, her chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath. Every muscle in her body ached, and her vision blurred from the pain spreading through her shoulder where acid had eaten into the armor. But there was no time to rest. The distant echo of weapons fire told her that other sections of the station were still under attack. Her people were fighting, and she had wounded to save. She pushed off the wall and limped back into the med bay, where the alien students froze at the sight of her. The once clean room was now a mess of overturned tables, burned panels, and blood, human red and alien blue. Cass's armor was cracked, her hands shaking, but her eyes still burned with the same fierce light. Without a word, she grabbed a roll of bandage, a needle, and a small vial of painkiller from the medical tray. One of the alien students, a slim creature with silver skin named Rak, whispered in disbelief, "You should rest. You are injured." Cass looked up with a small, tired smile. "Rest later. Work now." She pulled off her left glove, revealing that two of her fingers were badly burned. The skin was blackened, the edges raw and bloody. The aliens winced as she calmly poured disinfectant over the wound. The liquid hissed and foamed, and she didn't even flinch. She threaded the needle with one hand, clenching her teeth as she began to stitch the cut along her forearm. The aliens turned away, horrified. Rak covered his mouth, trembling. "You can't be serious," he muttered. "That's not medical care, that's torture." Cass only gave a low chuckle. "Yeah, it feels like it," she said, tightening the stitches. "But it works," the aliens couldn't understand. On their worlds, medicine was soft, clean, and painless. Machines did the work while patients slept. Watching a human patch herself up by hand, covered in blood, was like watching an ancient barbarian ritual. But Cass didn't stop there. One of the wounded human engineers, barely conscious, lay on a nearby cot with a deep cut across his leg. The blood wouldn't stop flowing. Cass grabbed a metal rod from the emergency kit, lit it with a small torch, and pressed it against the wound. The sound of sizzling flesh filled the room. The alien students recoiled in horror, some shouting, others gagging. The smell of burned skin was thick and heavy in the air. Cass held the man down, her jaw tight as she waited for the bleeding to stop. When it finally did, she looked up at the terrified aliens and said simply, "He'll live." One of the alien students whispered shakily, "That's barbaric. How can you do that to your own kind?" Cass's eyes softened for a moment as she wrapped the bandage over the cauterized wound. "Because if I don't, he dies," she said. "We don't have time for gentle methods out here. Sometimes saving a life means breaking it first." Her words hung in the air, heavy and cold. The alien student stood frozen, unable to speak. They had heard of human toughness, of their strange tolerance for pain, but seeing it up close was different. They saw not just strength, but something deeper, something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Cass finally sank down beside the cot, exhaustion catching up to her. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and refused to stop fighting. As the distant gunfire began to fade, the aliens watched her in silence. She wasn't a machine, yet she worked like one. She wasn't fearless, yet she faced fear as if it didn't matter. And when she looked up again, covered in sweat and blood, she gave them a small nod. "Now," she said, "if you're done staring, grab those medkits. We've got more to save." In that moment, every alien in the room realized that they weren't just studying humans anymore. They were witnessing a creature born from a world that never forgave weakness, a species that had learned to turn pain into power. The station trembled as another explosion rippled through the hull, sending sparks raining from the ceiling. Cass didn't even look up. Her hands were moving fast, working on a young alien cadet whose chest was bleeding from a plasma burn. The air was thick with smoke, the emergency lights flashing dimly, casting everyone's faces in ghostly red. Around her, the alien students moved stiffly, their minds still reeling from what they had seen. The human way of healing, brutal and unrelenting. They obeyed her orders now without question, their fear slowly turning into focus. "Pressure here," Cass said sharply, pressing the alien's trembling hands over the wound. "Don't let go till I say." She reached for a small pack of sealant foam and activated it, sealing the worst of the burn. Her own arm was shaking from blood loss, but she didn't stop. Sweat dripped into her eyes as she worked, and her lips were set in a grim line. The ship's comm crackled with static, and a desperate voice came through. "Harper, we're losing containment on Deck 7. The Dravik are breaching the lower airlocks." Cass's heart sank, but her voice remained steady. "Hold your ground, Commander. I'll get these people stable and move to reinforce." She switched off the comm before anyone could argue. Around her, the alien students stared in disbelief. She had already been wounded, her armor cracked, yet she was ready to fight again. Rag finally found the courage to speak. "You are going back out there? Alone?" Cass didn't answer right away. She finished sealing the burn, gave the patient a quick look to ensure he was breathing evenly, and then said quietly, "Someone has to. Humans don't sit back when others are dying." Her words sent a chill through the room. She rose to her feet, grabbing her rifle and checking its power levels. It was half empty, but she didn't seem to care. As she turned toward the door, one of the aliens, a tall blue-skinned female named Arani, stepped forward. "Lieutenant Harper," she said softly, "we want to help." Cass paused, surprised. She looked at their nervous faces, students who had come here to learn medicine, not to fight. Yet there was determination in their eyes now. She gave a short nod. "All right," she said. "Then listen carefully. You see someone bleeding, you patch them up. You hear someone screaming, you keep moving. Panic kills faster than wounds. Understand?" The aliens nodded, some shaking but ready. Cass pushed open the door and they followed her into the burning corridor. Outside, the station looked like a nightmare. Fire and debris floated in the zero-gravity sections where gravity generators had failed. The sound of distant gunfire and alien screeches filled the air. The Dravik were relentless, their dark shapes moving through the haze like monsters from a nightmare. Cass led the group through the wreckage, her every movement calm and controlled. When a wounded Marine came into view, pinned under debris, Cass rushed to him. "He's alive!" she shouted. The aliens hesitated, but then Arani and Rake moved forward, helping her lift the debris. The man's leg was crushed, the bone exposed. Cass didn't hesitate. She pulled out a small injector, gave him a shot of painkiller, and grabbed her combat knife. The aliens froze in horror again as she said, "We can't save the leg. We save the man." Before they could speak, she began cutting. The screams filled the corridor, echoing off the metal walls. Cass's face didn't change. She worked fast, blood splattering across her gloves. When it was done, she sealed the wound with foam, tied it off, and motioned for the aliens to lift him. "Move," she ordered. They carried the unconscious soldier toward a safer area, their faces pale but their steps steady. For the first time they began to understand, not just human pain tolerance, but the deep, fierce compassion hidden behind it. To a human, mercy was not gentle, it was brutal, sharp, and real. Cass turned back toward the smoke-filled hallway, her rifle ready. Her voice was low but filled with iron. "They want this station," she muttered. "They'll have to walk through me first." The aliens, who had once seen humans as reckless creatures, now followed her like soldiers behind a commander. And somewhere deep inside, they knew they were witnessing something that would change the way they saw the universe forever. The battle outside the medbay had turned into pure chaos. The station's corridors were now a maze of wreckage, smoke, and the cries of the wounded. Cass Harper moved through it like a ghost, fast and precise, her rifle blazing with every burst of plasma fire. The alien students followed behind her, their fear slowly hardening into resolve as they watched how she fought, calm, fearless, and always thinking 2 steps ahead. A blast shook the floor as a section of the ceiling collapsed, showering them with sparks. Cass threw herself over one of the students, shielding him with her armor as metal debris clattered around them. When the shaking stopped, she stood again, coughing through the smoke. "Everyone alive?" she called out. A few shaky voices answered yes. "Then we keep moving." She didn't waste a second. The Dravik were still pushing through the outer corridors, their numbers endless. Their black carapaces shimmered under the flashing emergency lights as they screeched, firing plasma bolts that turned steel into molten slag. Cass led her group into the defense hall, a long stretch lined with broken gun turrets and the bodies of fallen soldiers. The air was heavy with the smell of burned metal and blood. In the distance, she could see the shimmering blue barrier of the reactor core still intact but flickering dangerously. If the Dravik reached that core, the entire station would explode. She knew what she had to do. "Raik, Arani, set up a triage zone behind those crates," she ordered. "Anyone we find alive, you treat them. I'll hold the corridor." The aliens hesitated, their eyes wide. "By yourself?" Raik asked quietly. Cass just gave a grim smile. "You wanted to learn about humans," she said, loading a new power cell into her rifle. "This is our final lesson." The next few minutes were a blur of violence. The Dravik came in waves, their heavy footsteps shaking the floor. Cass met them head-on, her plasma rifle glowing hot as she fired until the barrel smoked. When the gun overheated, she switched to her sidearm, then to her combat knife, striking with the speed of someone who had been through hell and refused to die there. Her armor was cracked and blackened, her face streaked with soot, but her eyes never wavered. Behind her, the alien students worked desperately, dragging wounded Marines out of the fire, patching them up as best they could. They used everything Cass had taught them: pressure, sealant, improvisation. Their hands trembled, but they didn't stop. At one point, a Dravik warrior managed to charge through, knocking Cass to the ground. The alien's claws sliced across her chest plate, tearing it open. She gasped in pain, but grabbed the nearest metal rod and drove it into the creature's throat. It fell back screeching and she kicked it away. Her breathing was heavy now, each inhale sharp and painful, but she refused to back down. The alien saw her struggling, yet standing tall, and something inside them shifted. Arani dropped her tools and grabbed a fallen blaster. "We fight too," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Raik followed, firing beside her. The others joined in, their fear drowned by the fire of courage. The corridor turned into a storm of light and sound. Plasma bolts screamed through the air, walls burst into flames, and the station's alarms wailed in agony. Cass led the defense like a commander forged in chaos, shouting orders, giving directions, protecting everyone she could. The aliens fought beside her, no longer students but soldiers. One by one, the Dravik began to fall, their advance slowing, then breaking. The last one tried to retreat, but Cass didn't give it the chance. She raised her rifle, took a deep breath, and fired the final shot. The creature collapsed in a burst of green flame. Silence fell. Only the hum of the reactor and the soft crackle of fires remained. Cass dropped her rifle and fell to her knees, exhausted. Her armor was torn, her body covered in cuts and burns, but her eyes were still alive with that same fierce light. The alien students stood around her, speechless. They had seen something no textbook could ever describe: the raw, terrifying beauty of human will. Cass looked up at them with a faint smile. "That's what we call first aid," she said softly. "We keep each other alive, no matter what it takes." The alien, still trembling, finally understood that the human way of healing was not only about mending wounds, It was about refusing to die, even when the universe demanded it. The fires had finally begun to die down, leaving the once proud station a graveyard of twisted metal and silence. The smell of smoke and scorched circuits hung heavy in the air, mingled with the faint metallic tang of blood. Cass Harper sat slumped against the wall, her rifle resting beside her, its power cells long empty. Her armor was shattered in several places, her hands trembling from exhaustion and blood loss. Every breath burned in her chest, but she was still alive. Around her, the alien students moved quietly through the wreckage, tending to the wounded and putting out small fires. Their once bright uniforms were stained with soot and blood, but their faces had changed the most. They no longer looked like frightened learners, they looked like survivors. Rake knelt beside Cass, gently wrapping a clean bandage around her arm. "You need medical attention," he said softly. "Serious medical attention?" Cass gave a tired laugh. "I've had worse," she whispered, though her pale skin told another story. She tried to stand but stumbled and Rake caught her. For the first time, she didn't push him away. Outside the shattered windows, space stretched endlessly, filled with distant stars and drifting wrecks of Dravik ships. The human fleet had arrived just in time to finish the job. What was left of the enemy was now retreating, limping back into the dark void. A voice came over the comms, crackling through the static. "This is command. The station is secure. Casualties high, but survivors found. Hold position for extraction." Cass closed her eyes for a moment, relief flooding through her. They had made it. Against all odds, they had survived. The alien students gathered around her, unsure what to say. They had seen her fight, bleed, and save lives in ways they never imagined possible. To them, she had been more than a soldier. She had been a living lesson in the impossible strength of humanity. When the rescue teams finally arrived, they found the medbay filled with wounded soldiers and alien cadets working side by side. The humans were shocked to see how the aliens had adapted, using rough field methods, applying pressure with their hands, sealing wounds with makeshift materials, and following every brutal, efficient trick Cass had taught them. One medic paused and said quietly, "You trained them well." Cass smiled faintly. "They learned fast." Her voice was weak, but there was pride in it. As the medics lifted her onto a stretcher, she reached out and grabbed Rake's wrist. "Remember what you saw," she said. "Pain isn't the enemy. Giving up is." Rake nodded, his throat tight. "We won't forget." Days later, when the survivors were safely aboard the human hospital ship, the story spread across the fleet and beyond. Alien news networks told the tale of the battle at Orion Station, of the human lieutenant who fought while bleeding, who performed surgeries under fire, and who taught alien students that healing was sometimes the hardest form of courage. The Velian medical academies even started a new course named after her, Field Resilience and Death Worlder Medicine. The students who had survived with her became instructors, teaching what they called the Harper Method, a mix of calm under fire, ruthless improvisation, and unbreakable will. Cass Harper recovered slowly. Her body bore scars that would never fade, but her spirit was unchanged. When she was strong enough to walk again, she stood before the observation window, watching the stars drift past. Beside her stood Rake and Arani, now wearing human medical insignias. "You could have let us hide," Rake said quietly. "You could have fought alone." Cass looked at him and smiled. "Then you'd never have learned what it means to be human." She turned her gaze back to the stars. "We survive by helping each other. That's our first rule, and our last." As the ship moved on, the aliens looked at her with new understanding. They realized that humans were not just warriors, they were healers who faced pain with open eyes, who could tear themselves apart to save others, and who refused to surrender even when everything was lost. And somewhere deep in their hearts they knew that no lesson, no book, no machine could ever match what they had seen with their own eyes, the terrifying, beautiful art of human first aid.